Well, I would like to welcome everybody to our Family Matters podcast, to episode two. My name is Courtney Moore Lyle, and I'm your host. And I have Ruben Davis joining us today, and Miss Hope Moore joining us as well. We're going to touch again on intentional parenting. We talked about it last week. We're going to touch on some different topics this week. And so I'm glad you all are here. Thank you guys for coming back and talking about this topic again. So, welcome. Just to recap, last week we talked about intentional parenting, what that looked like. Basically, what does that mean to be an intentional parent, being present, prioritizing maybe like the end goal and what that looks like for you as a parent, not having quick fix goals as parents when it comes to some of the ways that we parent and make decisions. We talked about how to be intentional in our approaches and some of those ways as being intentional. And so today we're going to touch on a few more topics, and I'm really excited to have you guys talking about this topic again today. So, how's your day going?
Oh, we're good.
Good.
Yeah, I'm good over here. How you doing, Courtney?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm excited to dive into some deeper topics. I know we talked about some misconceptions about parents being intentional, and I'm just going to read a few that we touched on. We talked about some misconceptions were that intentional parents are super, 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 super strict, right? We talked about that they're not fun. We talked about intentional parenting. You have to be a perfect parent in order to be an intentional parent. And so, with talking about intentional parenting, I kind of wanted to go into how does an intentional parent handle boundaries? How does an intentional parent handle discipline? Right? What does that look like when we're trying to be intentional, but we still have to have boundaries and discipline for our kids?
Okay, ladies first. I'll let you go, Sister Hope.
Thank you, Ruben. First of all, to the question of how we're doing, I am super excited. We are in Passion Week, leading up to the reason we exist as a church. So I'm just super excited about Resurrection Sunday coming up. But the question was, how do we, as an intentional parent, handle discipline, and how do we handle boundaries? And
Mhm.
I would say we have to be intentional in being in doing positive discipline. That is really critical. That we don't just call out a consequence, pull it out of thin air, but that we are intentional in how we discipline and that we do positive discipline. I was studying up on this. And some of the things that I came up with were the first thing you want to do is to set clear expectations. And I
Mhm.
think that's critical for the child to know what's expected. And also, if you don't do this, then these are the consequences. So that those are the boundaries and that's the discipline, but setting clear expectations. Another one that I came across was positive reinforcement. You know, it's an old saying, you catch a whole lot more flies with honey than you do with
Mhm.
vinegar. So be positive. Let your kids know when they did a good job. And then hopefully they will want to please you and they'll continue that behavior. That's another one. Another big one, I think we talked about this last time, was modeling the behavior that you want to see. That's really critical. You can't expect your child to, you want your child to behave a certain way, but you're over here behaving a different way. So model the behavior that you want to see. I thought this one was really interesting. I'm kind of old school. We always talk about time out, but this one was time in instead of time out. And I thought that was pretty neat. So instead of putting a child and punishing the behavior, you
Mhm.
were what's the word? Sitting in with that child and drawing in close to them and talking about, okay, what was what was wrong with this behavior? helping them to understand their emotions and then helping them to correct that behavior. So time in instead of time out. And I think that's enough for me right now. So Ruben, I'm gonna let you
You
hop in there.
you just jumped on something that I was gonna want to jump on because when I thought about um, the intentional parenting, even positive discipline techniques, I was thinking of like, man, we're gonna have to like kind of leave behind some things that we kind of grew up on.
Absolutely.
Right. Timeout being one, instead of kind of a time in, because that's a new concept. But it makes sense. It makes total sense. And then the other thing that I was thinking of, for me, it's like the positive is also uh, the words we use. A
Absolutely.
lot of times, we'll do a bunch of don'ts, and I'm trying to replace the do's with the don'ts now. Like, get off of that. Don't do this. Don't do that. But you find out that you actually are not giving them anything to work with all those don'ts, right? You're telling them don't do this, don't do that, but what are we actually telling them to do? And so I'm trying to take even my uh, initial way of putting it and changing that, turning it on its head and making it more about what I would like for them to do instead of all the don'ts, making all these boundaries. But man, there's so many other things though when I think about it that we may have to like unlearn even from our old way of kind of doing it in order to be more intentional. Because when you were talking earlier, I just thought of the do as I say, not as I do.
Absolutely.
I heard that so many like that has got to be the craziest one. It didn't even make sense when I heard it as a kid.
Or I'm the adult, like you're the kid, so this is I get to do X, Y, and Z, but the behavior is still
Right.
not positive,
Right.
or you know, uh, setting the example that you want your child to move forward to. And I
Right.
was just thinking, even as you all were sharing little nuggets, I think it's important for parents to know that it's okay to make a plan, right? It's
Yeah.
okay to sit down and say, okay, these are the things that I'm really struggling with as a parent, and I want to have some solution, oriented conversations with myself or my husband or whoever to say, okay, this is a plan that I want to write out so that when these behaviors come, I can set clear expectations because it's hard to do that on the spot, right? It's hard to do that. And I think we talked on this last week of it's important to ask for help. I know that like a lot of us probably were raised in the old school way, but still asking someone, for their advice or how am I overreacting in this situation? Does this seem like a fair consequence for this particular behavior? Because oftentimes, one thing I think it's important to remember is that when we discipline, I feel like an intentional parent has to learn not to be angry when we discipline, right? To make
Mhm.
sure that we're in a calm space and we're
Mhm.
intentional about that discipline or that boundary, but it's not coming from anger.
Absolutely.
Um, Especially when you have a teenager, because every day
But
it's something different, right? It's something different. And so that you have, I don't want to say it's like, they're doing things sometimes that can be really hurtful. And so you might take it personal. And so you have to really understand that my child is really just going through some phases right now. I don't want to discipline them on this, because I'm angry. Right. So you want to make sure that you have fair boundaries and fair expectations as well. You know,
Speaking of teenagers, and I think this is important, throughout, whether you got little kids or older kids or adult kids, but this thing of active listening, really
Mhm.
pulling in and listening to what that child has to say and not just, listening, trying to figure, okay, help me get through with this so that I can go on to the next thing, but actually pulling in, looking at their body language, listening to their words, looking at their emotions. That's really critical when you are talking about disciplining, because if you don't listen, you don't really know, kind of what the underlying cause is. People say words, but those words don't always add up to what the real issue is.
Mhm.
But
Right.
that thing of active listening, that's really important. And going back to one thing that Courtney said earlier, getting help. You know, sometimes we think that, we can go, and you can go to, a spouse or your pastor or, another adult to help you. But there's so many resources too out there, so many books, so many podcasts, so many articles that will, if you find yourself where you don't know what to do in the situation, I would say do some Googling and pick, of course, pick the biblically based ones that, align with your values. But you can learn a whole lot by just reading, by just listening to someone else's experience. And that will help you understand, did I overreact on this? Or should I have handled this differently? Do I need to go back and apologize? So I just think that's critical. You can get help from a lot of different areas. But of course, I would always pick the biblically based ones, and I would also make sure that they align with my values.
Yeah, I think apologizing as a parent is important because sometimes we overreact. And I know, I mean, I've been guilty of it. I'm sure every parent has been where, you know,
Mhm.
you set a boundary and then you sit back, you're like, well, that action didn't really warrant that consequence, or I was wrong. I misjudged that situation, especially with, a lot of times, even being intentional, it being intentional with their schooling, being intentional with coaches, being intentional with their friend groups, right? Because as they get older, and especially now kids are exposed to so much, you have to be very vigilant about every single thing. And so making sure that, if you do mess up, you go back and you have those conversations because there's going to come a time where your child is getting ready to leave and you want to be able to have that open door with them to have that conversation to say, hey, I want you to talk to me about these things and you can trust me with these things. And if we talk about this, I won't get upset with you, but I need you to come to me and have these conversations. And I was having a conversation with someone else and we were talking about, how do you, how are you intentional with your children as they grow older when they're exposed to so much in the world?
Mhm.
But you really have to immerse yourself in that world to know what they're exposed to. And so there's just a lot of factors to, you know, handling discipline and boundaries. But there's something that you all said that made me think of a one more topic, and that was you said active listening, but also time
Mhm.
in. I'm wondering, is that the same as people would say gentle parenting? I
Uh,
think a lot of people
So,
might.
what's their understanding of gentle parenting?
Well, I think I think there's a misconception of gentle parenting. I think when we talk about active listening, giving your
Mhm.
child a choice, right? When we were growing up, it was whatever your mom cooked, that's what you ate, right? But giving children an opportunity to be heard. What would you like? How do you feel? Right? How does this make you feel? Like giving them that platform. Or when they do something wrong, well, let's
Yeah.
talk about that. Let's discuss like why did you make that decision? Right? That's
Mhm.
not how I was raised, you know. So it's like,
Yeah.
oftentimes it's like, that could be considered, you know, well,
Parenting.
Johnny, that wasn't a kind choice. Let's not do that again. And I think that in a lot of ways is what people feel is missing with our kids today. There's a lot of gentle parenting, listening to what they have to say, their feelings, their thoughts, and everything. But then there's not enough, oh no, you done lost your mind. Sit your tail down.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not going to that game. Like actually like no, zero tolerance. You are, I'm not talking, you know what you did. I'm not saying you don't address it, but
Talking about the other end of the
right,
spectrum now.
right. But it's just like you're either far left
Mm.
or you're far right, right? Is there a
Right.
balance? But it just made me think of gentle parenting. I wonder if
Okay. Okay.
perceive that as gentle parenting.
You know what? I can't say I'm an expert on gentle parenting. I've heard about it and maybe saw a YouTube video or two on it. Um, but when thinking about it, it made me think back to the days where I was in education and working in the dean's office, and we had now begun to use restorative justice, right? And just reading and diving into restorative justice, what I noticed is that what would happen is in some cases, or in some offices and some organizations, they would implement restorative justice, but they had an issue with the way in which they implemented it because it's restorative justice. And if you just have the restorative part, but not the justice part, then you're not really doing anyone any favors. Meaning, what was happening is that people would implement, the talk, and having conversations and being able to like bring a child back into the classroom or restore a child, back into a relationship, but there was no consequence to what they were doing. And if I can give a little story, but I'll give it, the short version. There was a case where a child was being threatened, bullied almost daily, and the bully was even threatening with weapons. The weapons were never found, but the child said, "Hey, no, he had a knife, and I fear for my life." And this was at an organization I didn't work at, but it was this was a story told to me from somebody. But what they did was they restored the relationship. The bully was able to continue being at school, but no one ever gave him a consequence. And so who ended up leaving? That child who felt threatened. And so in the end, restoration with no justice doesn't really work very well. So if we're talking about gentle parenting and people choose a gentle parent, I hope that they're doing a full implementation of it and understanding that you still have to have the natural consequences, even if we're going to have conversations saying, "Hey, that wasn't a good idea. Let's try that again." There still has to be a consequence.
And see, I think that's where the gentle parenting gets misconstrued because people believe in the conversation, but then there's I think an underlying issue with, okay, well, so do you still get popped? Right? Because a lot of new parents don't believe in that, right? They believe, oh, well, that's a slave victim mentality that we have been kind of thrown into as a culture, right? So do you still tap that behind when they get out of line, as well as what he said, like, do you still get a butt whooping, and I'm gonna tell you what you did wrong, or is it, well, you're gonna sit in your room for a day, right? Because really, and I understand every child doesn't need a whooping, right? But what is equivalent to the whooping for the child? Is it taking away their Oculus, their technology? Is it, oh, well, you're not going out with your baseball friends tonight because you chose to turn in your assignment 2 days late. So now you get to look at me, right? That type of thing. I'm like, what are we following through with that? But that gentle parenting piece, I think it sometimes happens where parents they don't believe in that whooping, but it's not always a whooping. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah, I think what we have to understand is even if you do the time in versus time out, or anytime you are doing discipline and boundaries, you still have to be consistent. Consistency still has to be there. And there has to be some non-negotiables because if you don't set those boundaries, then kids won't know that, hey, I think the time in is you talk to them about why they did what they did, but there still, to me, needs to be some type of consequence. I'm not saying that you don't, I'm not saying that you do, the harsh discipline, but there still has to be some things that are non-negotiable so that kids know that, hey, if I go this far, then this is what the consequence is going to be. There still has to be boundaries and there has to be consequences. But I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
maybe the choice is different of what you choose. And maybe you as a parent and a kid come up and decide together, okay, what those consequences should be. But there still has to be consequences, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah. I mean, even taking it to the Bible, there, and I need to go and find the scripture because I don't have it right now, but there's scripture that says that if we are not uh, uh, disciplining, we're in other words not doing our job, and so we can't leave the discipline part out. But when you said earlier positive disciplining, you didn't say you didn't leave the discipline part out. It's still there.
Absolutely.
Whatever form that takes, there has to be some form of discipline or correction because
Absolutely.
if we're not correcting, then we're not loving. We're not doing any service. And I just remember times that I'm with a group of kids and I'm explaining to them like, hey, guys, you want us not to have any rules, but actually, if I don't care about you, it doesn't look like me giving you correction, um, no matter how that looks. It doesn't look like me giving you correction and saying, "Oh no, we're not doing anything. So we're shutting it down. It's lights off. Everybody is like we're no longer going to the playground or we're no longer having recess or no you lost your but it doesn't look like that. It looks like if I don't care about you, it actually looks like me not participating in your life at all, not giving you any kind of correction because you can go running out into the street for all I care if I don't care about you. And so everything points to there needing to be some kind of discipline, no matter what it is. If it's gentle parenting, it still has to come with some sort of natural consequence or something.
Yeah. And I think
And
with intentional parenting, oh, excuse me. I was gonna say with intentional parenting, to me, it's always about the end goal. Like if you're gonna give your child a choice, you're trying to empower them to make good decisions later on in life or whatever, if you're going to, I mean, no matter what you do, your intention is to set that kid up for success.
Yeah, yeah.
as everybody knows, I've been an educator for a while, and I see a change. I see a huge change in our youth, right? In our young students. I don't care if you go in elementary schools, middle to high schools, even college campuses. Um, there's a lack of respect. There's a lack of respect for authority, for parents, for each other,
Mm.
very low emotional intelligence and learning and understanding how to deal with their emotions and those type of things. Um, and we talk about biblically, and I'm an advocate for you getting a whooping at a certain age, right? You need to be tapped just because when they get older, they need to understand like you're not always going to be able to handle your child that way. But I think in those formative years, that 4 to 9, they need to understand that I will snatch you up because, when you're talking about being intentional and the end goal, those are the years, though. I used to think those were like, oh my goodness, like, there's so much to do. But now that kids are 15, 16 years old, they become a whole different person. And those formative years that you were spending, actually, okay, no, then they understand, I feel like the consequence of you're not having your phone or you're not doing this. The respect is there. But if I think sometimes parents need different tools than just sitting and talking, right? Because that works when they're 6, but
Mm.
it's not going to work when they're 15. It's
Mm.
not. It's just not. I mean, not these kids. Us, because we were kind of parented the old school way and life was just different. But these kids, they have to have a level of respect, a fear of you in some ways. I don't mean like a negative way. I mean in a positive way to where, okay, that's my mom, that's my dad, I'm going to respect them, right? And I just think that when we're being intentional about parenting, it can't always be, oh, I'm going to talk. And I do believe that even if you still get a whooping, I still sit down and talk with you. I got plenty of whoopings. And there was always the talk, well, I'm doing this because I love you and you did this. And I mean, it was the whole spiel, you know. But now I understand at my age now why I needed that discipline that way. I didn't think so in the moment, but I think the reason why a lot of our kids are struggling, a lot of parents are struggling with their kids is because they're not disciplining them. And it's not just, well, you go sit in timeout. You're going to tell a 15-year-old to go sit in timeout? He's going to walk out the door. You know, I'm just saying, you know, we need to, when I say make a plan, like I think sometimes that plan also has to deal with how do you, what does this discipline look like? Or how is this setting them up to be respectful later? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
One,
Yeah,
one thing.
I would.
Oh, go ahead.
So I'll just say this part. You know, parents they're gonna have to decide for themselves how they want to discipline. We know that because we're gonna let. But yeah, I had all the whoopings. I got all the spankings in my household growing up. But at the same time, I don't know if every one of my siblings needed that. Some of them um, did fine. They may have gotten one or two. But and so I don't know. I don't know. I think parents have to
Yeah,
put
yeah.
that
Not
in.
every kid, I agree. Not every kid is that kid that needs that, right? I
Yeah,
speak to
yeah.
the ones that we know that child needs, you know,
But
but
I agree wholeheartedly. There has to be a healthy respect. You know, I mean, you know, what does the Bible say in Proverbs about you know, fear of the Lord is the
It's
beginning of all
beginning.
wisdom.
You
We
know.
all need a healthy respect of God. You know, we need a healthy respect of anything. Like we need a healthy respect of the stove because it will burn you. So fear,
drugs, what you put in your body, because it will kill you. That's right.
exactly, exactly. So we need
But
that.
yeah, I think you guys are hitting on, I think one of the crucial points of one of the last questions, you know, that we were given was about how does the Bible and intentional parenting, how does that kind of go together? And basically, to me, you guys are hitting on that because you cannot wait until your child is 15 to
Mm,
decide you're going to parent them, that you're going to intentionally parent them. It has to start when they are 1 and 2, where you are modeling for them, where you are exposing them to God's words so they understand that this is what God's word says and this is how we live in this house. But and you can't, and you have to start correcting them then when you know they are, say they're 2 and, well, maybe they're not talking back at 2, maybe they're 6 and
Or
they're
they bite, like let's say they bite.
absolutely they bite. Then you have to help them understand then that that's not behavior that's appropriate. But you cannot wait until that child is a teenager. I don't think you can even wait until they're 12 or 13. I
mm-mm.
think you have to start helping kids understand boundaries, consequences, discipline. I think they have to start understanding that at least around 2. You know, they really need to start, you need to start helping them then so that they understand that when mom says, sweetie, if you continue this, I'm going to have to, you know, take this away. I'm going to have you sit over here, or, you know, we're not going to get to stay the whole time at the park. So they understand consequences and boundaries and discipline.
You know, and
Mhm.
and we've had, I mean, we really had a lot to say on like, you know, what um intentional parenting for boundaries and discipline, you know. And so that leads me to I want to kind of start like since we're talking about, you know, having that healthy relationship with God, and we've talked about making a plan, and we've talked about, you know, listening, active listening, and we've talked about, you know, time ins. Um what do you think some practical tips are for parents, to be more intentional with their routines so that this behavior and these boundaries make sense for the child to understand? Like, what are some ways that we can, positive ways that we can be intentional in our routine so that our kids understand how to be, um, they understand those expectations that we're setting for them. So kind of like how I said, like, we're
Right.
going to set a plan, right? So having like a clear goal, right? Um,
Oh yeah, yeah.
making sure that like you, uh, Sister Hope, you said, you know, it starts young, right? So those values are set young, right? What are some other practical tips that we can give parents? So we know they need to start young. We know they need to set values. We know that they need to be maybe set a plan. Um, and in that plan, like I've seen families have like family meetings, right? Where they sit down and they talk and they say, you know, we're going to sit down and, we're going to make sure that we have these conversations. For me, and one thing that I do is, we like to brunch. We like to go to brunch. So, but there's no phones at brunch. There's no phones, and I don't like phones in the car. I don't, if we're going to school, or somewhere we're driving, let's take our AirPod out, let's have a conversation. Let's talk through, that's a great opportunity to talk through, and I can set expectations for the day. I
Mhm.
can set
Mhm.
expectations for, hey, it's a new semester, what are your goals, and how can we grow from where we were, this semester? Or, hey, I noticed that, we play sports. So I noticed that you got really down on yourself. You didn't hit the ball the way that you wanted to. Um, why do you think that was? Like being intentional in the way that you're talking and listening to their feelings, and setting expectations for like when they do get upset and saying, okay, well, hard work allows us to prepare for some of the moments. So if we're not putting in the hard work, we can expect to reap, right, certain things. So just having those conversations, those meetings, those setting those boundaries, having that vision for your kids, I think is a good tip as to what we can give parents to help them be more intentional in setting their boundaries. That's what I would say.
Right, right. Those tips and I think you guys have been landing on a lot of it, this entire conversation. Sister Hope said something about uh goals, like having like a clear goal for your children, for your family. And I feel like that's one of them. And actually I'd like to hear more of Hope's goals, like some of those that you kind of came up with. But having those goals for our family, um, having, um, I think you also said it as well, just kind of like a consistency. No, that was Hope as well. Hope said that as well. But like being consistent, I know that was one of them.
Communication, open communication.
Open communication. That's another tip. I would
Do
absolutely.
we do we feel that children should have a choice in things? I think that's something that parents struggle with. Do we feel your child should have a choice in things?
That's interesting because one of the positive, I was reading about positive discipline, and what that was one of the positive discipline techniques was to offer your child a choice. But I thought it was they were it was offer a choice, but it was still it was still restricted. It wasn't like let them choose whether they're gonna go to school or not go to school. It was let them
Mhm.
choose which dress they're gonna wear today. Let them choose what vegetable they're going to eat. Let them choose where they want to go for this or for that. There were choices because the choices help, their self-esteem and things like that. But the choices still were um, guided choices.
They were
And I
within
think that's
boundaries. Right.
absolutely,
Right.
and
They
I
were
think
within the
that's the
boundaries.
that's the key. Offer choices, but there are some things, and this is me, and I know my old school is showing, but there are some things that I don't feel kids should have a choice on. I feel like, and that's because if you're living in my house, sleeping in my bed, eating my food, then I'm still your parent. And I feel like that you shouldn't have a choice as to whether maybe you go to church today or not. And I know it might be easier for me to let you stay at home, but there are
Amen.
some things that I just feel like that you should not have choices about. And maybe, but that's probably my age, but I just feel like there's some things I don't give my kids choices as to whether they go to school, as to if it's in their ability to get A's, then we don't come home with C's. So I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what
And
you have to say
you know
about
what?
the choice thing.
Well, and what you're pointing out is again going back to those kind of goals and values for your family, though. If in your household your goals and values are partly or hey, we go to church, then in my house we go to church. That's a part of that plan that you've already kind of set up. And so I think that that's what we're talking about. So to actually have them and not just kind of live without any direction, that would be intentional parenting.
Yeah. And I think too, it's important that, and we keep going back to this, starting young, right? And being consistent. So
Yeah.
starting young, being consistent, having a plan, right? If that plan doesn't work, go back, rework the plan, so being able to adjust and adapt to things. I think kids having choices is important, like you said,
Yeah.
Sister Hope, for some things, right? Not everything. You don't get a choice whether or not you go to school, right?
Mhm.
But you may have a choice of, okay, well, like prom, you want to wear a certain dress, great. But these are the boundaries within what the dress can have and not have,
Yeah.
or things like that. That's important to kids, or video games, right? So sure, you can play video games, but you don't get to do that during certain hours. So school nights is a non-negotiable, no. But Saturdays, sure, you can play these games because you're this old and these
Absolutely.
are appropriate games for you, right? Even though little Johnny's able to play this game, you know, I will give you appropriate choices for what you can do in your space.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah.
Right. I
But
think
I think, oh, go on, Ruben.
well, you know what? So when I thought about this, with the question you were posing, I was really just thinking about like how. So in our house, we came up with an idea that hey guys, every day you gotta have like in your daily routine you have to do at least these 5 things, and we called them the 5 B's. You gotta at least uh, take care of your bedroom, which is a part of a chore, but they're only 5 and 7, so bed is an easy way to put it. Bedroom, bathroom, like your hygiene,
Please, babe.
body, right? Please, babe. Your body, but that means for them exercise, some sort of exercise. Get outside. You got to do something every day. Bible and brain, and so we need to do something that some sort of Bible study, not just pray, but some sort of Bible study or something like that every day. And so we started off with just that, and we were just check marks.
Okay. What's the other two? Oh, you got 4.
So
What's the other two?
bed, bath, Bible, brain, and body.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so we started doing that. And we had to go back to the drawing board because we were like, hey, there's no reason for them to do this. They're like, whatever. It's like, okay, so if you do these, you'll get 60 minutes of maybe playing on the iPad on the weekend. So they're like, oh, 60 minutes, 60 minutes. And so they had their 60 minutes. We started them off with 60 minutes, and we ended up having to go back to the drawing board again because they had the 60 minutes and they were still not doing the B's. And we were like, okay, so we had to start taking away. You're not doing your B's. We're taking away 5 minutes every time we don't get your B's done. But that was more penalizing though. And honestly, at this point, we went back to the drawing board again. I said, "Hey, babe, you know what? We're coming at them, and we're taking away their 5 points, and they're going all, and they're trying to negotiate and trying to figure out how to get them back. Why don't we go in reverse and say you don't have the 60 minutes yet? You earn them by doing your B's. I was like, that's more like a chore anyway. Like you do your chores, you get some money. But so and that has been working out a lot better. They're going and they're wanting to check them off so they can get some extra minutes, and it is going in a positive direction instead of like, hey, you start off with this and now we're chipping at it.
Right.
But we had to keep going back to the table to figure out if it even made sense. And now they also have choice in it. I said, hey guys, we don't have to, you don't have to do the B's, although there's some, you're gonna need to brush your teeth. But but if you don't do your B's, oh, your bed's not done. Hey, you've missed out on that amount of time. And oh no, let me put my bed back together. We're probably gonna have to revisit this because as they get more complicated, as they are able to maneuver through things and get around us, I know we're gonna have to probably throw the whole thing out at some point. But it was just in our house, just a quick example of how, hey, we set up some goals. We knew what we valued. We gave them choices on whether or not they were able to do it. And we just had to keep coming back to figure out if this was actually working. We had to revisit it and tweak it. And so I would say those things are what, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's critical when you touched on one of the key words, values. You know what you as a family value. And so to me, and I think it's important that families, especially if they're going to do this intentional parenting thing, you got to figure out what you as a couple or a family, what you value. And then those values, you have to figure out how to accomplish them. Because to me, they say when you look at your checkbook, you can tell what you value, because that's where you spend your money. I say the same thing in a family, where you spend your time. That is probably what you really value. So figure out what it is that you value and figure out a way to make those values happen.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that to me is like kind of going back to the beginning of, starting with the end in mind,
Absolutely.
right? What is the end goal that you really want to download into your children as they grow up? When they're adults, what values do you want them to have? And how do you want them to serve God? And how do you want them to serve others and treat others and respect others? And when they leave your home, will they have this full cup of or downloaded memory of their family values that they can go out and do those things? And that's really what it's, and being an intentional parent is really all about, is how am I parenting in a way that my child can be a godly, productive adult in society, to get back to society, the best that they can,
Now I'm wondering now, because I want to kind of go around and ask y'all a question. If that's the case, as adults now, what would you say your parents valued? Because obviously it must have stuck with you if it's something that, so as adults now, what would you say your parents valued?
I would say my parents valued, well, for sure, education, right? And I would say education, respect, and God. Those are the three things, right, that I felt like my parents valued. And I know for me, like now that I'm a parent, those are the things that I feel like are important, that I'm pouring into my child, right? And it wasn't just like, oh, like you had to be the best, but like it's more of like you had to be capable to do what you were, what you could do best. And
Yeah.
And so I feel like just being a well-rounded individual, right? And I can see that, like, and I think as parents, I mean, a lot of times we talk about, oh, well, I'm not going to do that when I have a child, or I'm not going to, I learned from this. But then, I had great parents. So I feel like, you know, I wouldn't know how to be a mom if I didn't see my mom be a good mom. There were times where we went to church, but then we still had to be in bed at a certain time because we had school. Like there was a balance, right? And there was,
Mhm.
for me, I felt like there was, a model to where I could pull those nuggets, and now I can give that to my kid, right? I see my brother do it. Um, my sister just has Twizzy, but I see her do it with Twizzy. Twizzy gets
The
Twizzy gets
dog.
this, she gets things. Yeah, like her, So, but it's
Does he
just
have a bedtime? Is that what you said?
Twizzy is demanding. She hits her walks and her treats, and she's on her schedules, and things. But I just see it in all of us as we're. Um, it's nothing for me to see an elderly person and just to say, "Oh, yes, ma'am," or "No, sir." And I see adults my age not doing those things. They lack respect, or they don't have. They're not giving, or they're just very self-absorbed, or they're not really sure how to, or they're just not in the same space that me, my brother, and my sister are in. You know, when you look at the grand scheme of things, and
Mm.
we're all in three very different professions, but we all are, I feel like, still doing what we need to do as adults,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And
Carrying those values on.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's interesting, Ruben, that you would ask that question because those things that Courtney talked about, those are basically the same values that my mother instilled in us. My mom had to quit. Education was really important to her. She had to quit school when she was 15 and get married. And that was because, back in that day, you couldn't go to school by yourself because you would be taken advantage of when you're walking and stuff like that. So she
Mm.
had to quit school when she was 15 to get married, but she valued education and she pushed all of her kids, encouraged all 7 of her kids to get some type of higher education. Another thing she valued was community service, taking
Mm.
care of others, especially the elderly, making sure that that you shared what you had and that you looked out for someone who, needed help.
Yeah.
God, that was one thing that she raised all of us. And that was, my dad went to church, but not like my mom. I mean,
Mm.
she made sure we were up. We walked a mile and a half, 2 miles to Sunday school every Sunday. We
Mm.
were on time, you know. She valued God, she valued education, she valued community service, respect. But those are the values. And so that's why that thing of modeling, not
Mhm.
only did she teach us, but she modeled it for us.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's why it's so important, this thing of intentional parenting. I think as a parent, you have to understand that you do have influence. You're with that child more than anybody else. You're spending a whole lot more time with them. And so you have the time to put your values into your child. And I think that's another critical point. When Pastor and I found out that we were pregnant with Curtis, uh, we had the choice of buying a bigger house or getting a small house and me staying home. It was important to us that we put our values in our children. And I'm not advocating that everybody stay home and take care of their kids, but I am advocating that parents know what they value and take the time on a daily basis. That's what we were talking about earlier, those nuggets of what can you do intentionally on a daily basis. Spend that time, having intentional conversations with your child. I call it teachable moments. When
Yeah.
something happens, whether it's something really good or something really bad, spend that time talking to your kid about what happened, why it was good, why it wasn't good. But it's a teachable moment with
Yeah.
them. Spend that time before bed, I think that's a wonderful time to spend a little bit of time reading, especially if your kids are still where they like to cuddle and read,
Mhm.
read a Bible story, or just have them read a passage from the Bible, and you go through it and talk about what God is saying. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, spend time, like Courtney said, at
Mhm.
in the car ride, in the
Yeah.
car ride to school, or in the car ride home, or in the car ride to sports. You know, talking about God and values and things like that. Talk about worldly events. I
Yeah.
mean, be intentional in what you are downloading into your kids. Because believe it or not, those 18 years will go by, you'll blink your eyes and you'll wonder where they went. So be intentional every day. Try to download something positive. And this is another idea I read about a gratitude jar. Every day, find something to be thankful for. And of
Mm.
course, direct that thankfulness back to God. Teach them the Proverbs, teach them the wisdom scriptures. I mean, there's so many little things that you can do. And that was the thing someone was saying, start small, like at dinner time, or maybe uh, just, talk about, okay, am I thankful for today? Just one thing. So you put that focus back on God, you put that focus back on his goodness, but you also put that focus on not dwelling on the negative, but reaching down deep
Yeah.
and thinking about the good.
That's good. That's good. It sounds like you're saying stay in conversation, stay in like a relationship, be in
Be
their
present.
lives. Yeah.
Yeah, be present. Yeah.
Be
Yeah, be
present.
present. Be present.
And I,
Be
I would
present.
even say like, and we're gonna wrap up because we could stay on this all night, but
Mhm.
um I always saw my mom like in the spaces that we were. And when you're older, you don't really know why. But I think that intentional parents, um, especially today, you have to immerse yourself in their world. There are times I would just take off work and I will go and walk around my son's school, or I will be in the lunchroom, or I go to a practice because I want to see, and he may not even know, but I want to see who he's walking with, who's in his classes, who he's talking to, what, and then there are questions that I can ask, like, okay, so, tell me about this friend, or I noticed that, this friend was doing this behavior. It helps you understand your child a lot more, and it helps you be able to address situations intentionally because you know what's happening with them. If your child has a phone, pick it up, look through it. You need to know what your kids are texting, what they're watching, put limits. Like there has to be certain boundaries. But I just want to encourage parents as we're being intentional. Being present is also knowing who they're around and having conversations at lunch. Hey, invite your friends over. Bring pizzas, and you might need to bring six. I think I brought 12, and let them come sit down and talk and just get to know them and
Yeah.
listen to their conversations. Where's their headspace?
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
I bet you're answering questions too. Because I think in this day and age, we have to like answer real questions like in a real way. Not giving them more than what they can handle at the time, but my children, notice that they have um grandparents. Well, that mom has parents, but they never see my parents. And so that was a very early age that they noticed that. They were like, "Where's your mom?" Well, I had to explain, okay, well, my mom, she's dead. I couldn't put it any other way.
Your mom's in heaven.
I told her she's in heaven. I said, "Oh, I believe she's in heaven, absolutely." But she died. I didn't say, "Oh, well, she's no longer here." And then when
You
they
went
asked me what
away.
happened,
Right.
she went to sleep, or no, I'm not. I
Right.
can't give them anything like that. because kids can handle more than we think. But at the same time, we're in a day and age where they can find out a lot of stuff for themselves. And some of that stuff, could be off as well. But if we're not giving them real answers to things, they're going to stop looking to us to give them answers. They're going to go somewhere else in the end. So, but
Yeah.
I think it opens up that conversation, and you keep having those moments to be able to really talk about things.
Yeah. And you have to you have to allow your kids to ask their questions, and you cannot act like, oh my God, you can't act shocked or act like, you're upset, or because guess what? They will stop coming to you and they will get their answers, but you want them to get their answers from you as opposed to getting their answers from someone who doesn't really have your values and is not going to explain it the way that you would. So, you really you want your kids to talk to you.
You have to have that moment privately. You have to have that moment with someone that you trust privately, right? Even if you can get it out, just not in front of them, towards them.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you all for our podcast.
Oh, wait a minute. We forgot to talk about parent self-care.
Well, we're going to have to handle that next week because we are
Okay.
out of time.
That's a good one.
We are out of time. We have a few more things that we can
I
still
think Courtney
talk
needs
about.
some self-care right now.
Yeah.
That's what she's saying.
Yeah. So, but we have,
Yeah.
we're going to come back again to the table and
That's good.
and talk about some different issues with intentional parenting. But it is always a pleasure to have you all on the Family Matters podcast.
Thank you.
And I appreciate all of the insight and the answers. And we hope that if you're watching this, you will join us again for our next episode, episode 3, coming soon, talking about different aspects of intentional parenting and parenting tips for episode 3. So I want to say thank you, you guys, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.